I'll request Mohan Adiyam, who is going to address the uniformity in assessments, which Dr. Vijay already touched upon, but we'll now look forward to hearing from Dr. Mohan Adiyam.
We'll begin this. I'm sorry, this is not what should have been there. Yeah. We begin this with the concern that has come up from 2006 when we first started doing assessments. And then, from my own experience, I can say when I look back to the reports that we compiled in 2006, it's a little difficult to believe that we actually wrote those reports. And this has also been what was felt by SSE healthcare organizations who felt that there is a lot of variance in the way people write reports and the reasons why they write a few things in the reports. And so this session will focus on how NABH has taken steps to ensure uniformity in assessments. Now, we won't mind, this is Easter season and eggs are a good example. We won't mind the odd broken egg. But what we desire actually is that all eggs are intact. Therefore, we won't mind the odd report or the odd assessor or the odd observation which wasn't very clear, which wasn't acceptable, or which couldn't be traced to a standard. But if we got something like this, with each assessor, each observation, and each assessment cycle throwing up different issues, it's a problem for the assessed hospital, it's a problem for subsequent assessment teams, and it's a problem for the accreditation committee. So we've moved on. 2006 was certainly an exciting year. The advantages we had in 2006 were that we were a group of about 15 or 18 assessors, and my first 5 assessments, I had the technical committee members as principal assessors. So it was very easy to clarify doubts, to get them to tell us what was to be done and what wasn't. Dr. B.K. Rana, who was then the only other person from Dr. Gyani in the NABH Secretariat, was the chaperone. He would usually come on the first day of the assessment, stay on till the end of the day, and then make sure that the assessors were comfortable, tell us what to do, what not to do, and go away. And if there still was trouble, we could always call Dr. Gyani in the Secretariat at any time. Even we've called him at times in the evening to get clarifications, and they were available. And we could escalate issues to the TC and the AC quite easily. But what happened subsequently was that the number of applicant hospitals increased, the number of assessments increased, and the number of assessors increased. We know in management that as the span of an organization increases, control decreases. Similarly, as the number of assessors and the number of organizations increased, a lot of variations came into report writing. The more we did, the more we saw the variations. And it was clear that some guiding document was required because every assessor was interpreting the standards in a different way. And so there was a robust discussion among assessors and the TC members. A guidebook to the first edition came as an afterthought to the first edition of standards, where certain things were clarified, certain interpretations were clarified, and it was hoped that assessors would use the guidebook to guide them during assessments. By this time, a non-formal arrangement of contacting senior assessors had come into place, and guidance continued to flow from the Secretariat, and a serious review of all aspects of the assessment process, including report writing, was taking place even as assessments were going on. And so the variations were sought to be contained. The first assessors conclave was held in Delhi a little before the release of the second edition of the standards, and this issue was raised even as far back as then, that there were variations between assessors, and standards were difficult to interpret because of the language. At some junctures, it was also noticed that the standard said something and the objective elements related to something else, and this was addressed subsequently in the second edition of the standards, where there was more clarity, and a guidebook was released at the same time as the book of standards was released, so that people could refer to the guidebook. Both the hospitals and the assessors could refer to the guidebook. More frequent programs on implementation were conducted, so hospitals became more familiar both with the standards and with how assessors would implement and interpret those standards. There were technical sessions at the subsequent assessors conclave where technical issues were taken up and thrashed out. And an analysis of reports at these technical sessions came up with critique of some of the live reports that were written, and corrections and preventive action followed, where assessors were actually told that this is how you need to write the reports. And the feedback from healthcare organizations improved, because initially the fear was if we write anything to NABH, then they won't give us accreditation. But as that fear went away and more principal assessors started telling organizations that they were free to write back, organizations started to write back. By the third edition, a few more lessons had been learned. The third edition carried more clarity. There was reorganization of standards and objective elements, and interpretation of objective elements was given just below the objective elements in the same book as the standards book. So assessors didn't have to have two books with them. Hospitals didn't have to have two books to refer to. Formulae for all quality indicators were very clearly given, and at this time, a refresher course was held for all assessors in 4 different locations, and a mitigation plan came out during the assessors course, and NABH came out with a plan for migration from the 2nd to 3rd edition standards, which made it easy for assessors to understand whether they were assessing an organization under the 2nd edition or the 3rd edition. Simultaneously, in the Secretariat, there was a move towards automation and a management information system solution for the NABH Secretariat itself. A dynamic expanded website has subsequently been set up, which has a separate area for assessors' interactions with assessors. There are discussion groups and there are blogs on this site. There is an assessors management committee which goes through the reports periodically and writes back on the assessors' site to point out what errors took place, what needed to be corrected, how they needed to be corrected, and why these errors are creating difficulties for hospitals and the accreditation committee. These were live examples with analysis and solutions. And in the background, an assessor's evaluation process also was set in motion, and an informal performance appraisal was taking place to ensure that assessors who were doing poorly got a chance to improve their skills by working with more experienced assessment teams. So where have we reached now? There has been an intensive introspection, and we understand from all that happened during the last 3 sessions in Delhi, in Lonavala, and in Chennai, that there were fierce deliberations within the technical committee itself, very impassioned discussions on how the standards should emerge. And as a result of this, we have a 4th edition where there is tremendous simplification of language. In fact, my first thought when I saw the draft was that everything that I had been hoping for in the last 3 standards have actually come through in the 4th standards. The language was simple, easy to interpret. The conclaves had the technical committee members attending and actually themselves clarifying what had gone. You heard Dr. Basil and Dr. Badri speak to you a little earlier. At the conclaves, this is more elaborate. They told us why something was put in or why something was removed. And so we are now clear why something is there and how we conduct these assessments. On pain areas, there were explicit clarifications, and I'll run through some of these as we go along. The first was how to approach challenging situations. First, look at not at the wordings, but at the intent of the standard or the objective element. Look at whether the interpretation is in line with what is given in the guidebook. Don't go off at a tangent and say, you can keep the guidebook to yourselves, but we interpret the standard or objective element differently. Look at whether the statutory framework is broadly addressed. If something is a good accepted practice everywhere, don't nitpick and say, but this is not written here or this is not written there. Make sure that patient safety is always ensured. If there is a system failure, look at why it has taken place rather than simply write that there was a system failure, and see whether the organization is innovating. If an organization is innovating and the outcomes of the innovation are good, don't bother to see whether the objective element language and what the organization has done match word for word. The issue of non-allopathic doctors has already been addressed. The guidance is very clear. As long as they're not prescribing medications and taking patient-related decisions, it's all right to have them in physician support roles. Quality assessment in radiology used to be a huge problem. Assessors would go and say, no, you don't have any quality assurance. And if it was someone with a laboratory background, there is a, where is your EQUAS, where is your IQC, where is your control chart, where are your running reports, none of which is relevant to radiology. So now it's very clear what we're looking at. We're looking at peer review, and we're looking at appropriateness of the imaging test. Care plan was another big issue. Many assessors felt that the care plan should have a minute by minute by minute, blow by blow account of what would be done for the patient. Impossible. For example, if someone's come to your hospital with fever of 3 months duration, we cannot have the destination in sight at the end of 24 hours of assessment. So the care plan matter has been addressed, and we've already seen Dr. Basil has explained what has been done in this regard. We have components of the care plan clearly defined, and now it's easy for assessors, because we check for these things. If they are there, fine. If they're not there, we can tell the healthcare organization that the care plan is incomplete. We've also been told what not to do as assessors. Do not insist on documentation for goals, and preventive aspects can occur anywhere in the case sheet. We don't even know what the diagnosis is, and we can't in the history sheet at the end of the diagnosis or care plan have what preventive measures must be taken. So as long as it's somewhere in the case sheet at the end of care, that's fine. End-of-life issues was again a pain point. We used to make fun when we started assessments in the POI programs that end-of-life for most hospitals was tagging the body, finding the mortuary, and making sure the bill was settled before the body was handed over. But now we know we've moved away from that. We actually have guidance this time around on how will assessors assess whether there is a process for end-of-life care. So there are processes against which there is a checklist, and we check whether these are there or not. We look at the end-of-life processes. We look at structures. The third pain point was reuse. Many hospitals in India reuse. Now, we don't find an equivalence anywhere, though the CDC has certain guidelines on reuse of single-use devices. So this time we've addressed this in the standards. We've said hospitals need to have a policy. They need to say how many times they can reuse something, and we need to check whether they're reusing these devices only for those number of times. So it's become simpler. Hospitals also have more leeway. CSSD, in the guidebook to the second edition, I remember that's where this first came up. 1 square meter for less than 400 beds and 0.75 square meters for more than 400 beds was given, and everybody jumped on this literally and said, you build a new CSSD, you break this wall down, you move that away, your theater is useless without a CSSD. Now it's very clear that it is only a guideline. As long as the functions of the CSSD are met, and that the output of the CSSD serves the purposes of patient safety, the CSSD should be all right. There should be validation, there should be engineering controls, but don't nitpick about where it is located, how it is structured, and whether walls should be broken, and what kind of... People have gone on to say, this is the company that you should approach and have your sterilizers changed to this company's sterilizers. We can't do that anymore. Certain other clarifications have come which have been covered. Leave law to the law enforcers. It's not necessary for assessors to look at this unless safety is impacted. Facility management rounds, we used to go around saying, why is your AC unit here? Why is your diesel boiler here? How much diesel do you use? Can we look at the log of your diesel usage? That's not required anymore. We look at this from a safety angle, not from an engineering angle. Registration of nurses has been clarified. As long as they're registered anywhere, that's okay for the time being. Antecedent evaluation wherever possible. Stress on the intent of the standard rather than on dogma. The first 2 editions, we all practiced a lot of dogma, but now we know it's the intent that's important, not the dogma behind the intents. And the report formats have been standardized, and online submission of reports is encouraged. Now, this is again a big problem because we have certain linguistic limitations when it comes to different assessors, and people use flowery language sometimes, some people are blunt, some people are too polite, so polite that we don't even understand what they're trying to say. So these formats have been standardized, and some guidance is available on how to write these reports. These will be vetted periodically and feedback given to assessors. The simplified language, it is expected, will eliminate ambiguity. Assessors will have clarity on what is to be assessed. The forum will lead to resolution of interpretation issues. The management committee will ensure early correction of aberrations on the part of the assessors, and an iterative process of improvement will continue, and uniformity will result. This is Easter season. Today is Hosanna Sunday, and so we can have a variety of Easter eggs as long as they're all eggs and they're decorated and meant for distribution at Easter. It's quite all right, but they ought to be eggs when we write the reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan. I think while you were talking, I was just thinking of my first experience as an observer assessor. So one of my colleagues, the assessor, decided to take the class for the nurses. So I was wondering what was happening. Was it an assessment or was it a class? So I think NABH has addressed this. There is an SSM management committee, and I think there is standardization happening now. I'd also now like to welcome our Secretary General, Mr. Ravi Singh, and request him to come up to the front, please. Thank you.